This is This Week in Perspective with me, Adam SIMBEYE. The 2016-2017 budget, as presented in Parliament, has been welcomed positively and to some extent with reservations in some quarters, as it were. What is the impact of the budget on business and industry? Taxes, for example, and issues of investment climate. To try and answer some of these questions, to discuss this topic today with me are, on my left, Professor Humphrey Moshi from the Department of Economics, University of Dar es Salaam, a regular participant on this program before. That's my left, I beg your pardon, viewers. On my right is Joseph Limo. He's an associate director of PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's basically a lawyer, but a specialist in taxation and consultant in terms of in matters of tax. He spent some time in New Zealand. Thank you for gaining that experience. Last but not least, you know this face, viewers. You have seen this face for many years in the program. Hussein Kamote. He's a director of research, policy, and whatever advocacy. And advocacy at the Confederation of Tanzania Industries, CTI. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program.
Thank you very
Viewers, I must apologize on the outset that all my efforts to try and get a senior representative from the Ministry of Industries and Trade was unsuccessful. To try and get somebody from the Ministry of Finance, it was not successful. And one or two others representing the industry or business, it was also not successful. So that's why you can see the table is only 3 panelists. Nonetheless, I'm sure these 3 gentlemen will do justice to our topic tonight. So, welcome again to the program. How has business and industry received the 2016-2017 budget? I start with you, Professor?
We'll start with those.
I start with the businesses themselves. Okay. Hussein.
Yeah, for us in CTI, we have seen this budget, as usual, as having positive sides and the negative side. On the positive side, and especially for the manufacturing sector, it increased the allocation of development budget to finance development projects, especially in the infrastructure development, like roads, electricity, things like that, because those are key issues for the manufacturing sector. So we wish to congratulate the government for increasing the allocation at least to 11 trillion for development projects. So we feel that this will stimulate the industrial sector. Secondly, we have we saw that the budget has removed some of the nuisance taxation, especially those who are charged by Tanzania Food Drugs Authority, because these are small taxes, but they are causing a lot of problems to manufacturers and the business community as well. So this was a very good kind of positive issues which we have, the general ones. But of course, there has been some specific good issues which the government has done. For instance, it has increased the import duty on iron products, building material, because these things we are producing them in quantity and quality in Tanzania. But again, the government also has increased import duty on cement. We have now a huge amount of cement to satisfy the local demand. I think now currently we have about 6 million metric tons per year, which that is the capacity of production, and the demand is around 5. So we have extra. But again, everything has got good, a bad side and a good one. On the bad, maybe not as bad, on the negative, we feel that the budget has been overambitious. The 29 billion to on our
the business
the
and
business
industry
feels that the budget which has been announced of 29 point something trillion or 0.5 is on the higher side. We are saying that because no new sources have been identified. The minister increased the budget using the same already narrow base. So we feel that the government, the business community and the manufacturing sector will cover more in the revenue, and that is going to be increasing cost of production. So we feel the 29 billion is on the high side, using the same sources of revenue. We haven't seen any new sources of revenue, and to our views, perhaps even the attainment of this target may be very difficult. But also, we are very much worried, especially in the investment in the manufacturing sector in particular, the changes in stability of taxation regime in Tanzania. That discourages the expansion of the existing businesses, but of course, new investment. Today you have this kind of regime. The other 1 year you have this one. That instability in taxation regime actually discourages new investment. And that is what we have seen through this year. We see the VAT, whereas the VAT has been introduced. We saw the introduction of capital gain on share capital taxes. So these are the issues. We are not so sure what will happen next door. So
would you as business rather not have these taxes, or how would you like?
Well, taxes are important for the government.
Yes.
For revenue, for investment in government expenditures. But what we want is a space. Not after every 1 year you make changes. For my planning, I need 5 years. So we don't mind if there's the period for adjustment is long enough, say 5 years and above. But 1 year you make a change, the other year, that is what you don't want. But for taxation, yes, you should, but it should be done carefully so that not to discourage production, not to discourage investors.
Professor, do you share that view?
To some extent.
Yes.
I'm not a businessman,
yes.
But I know the concerns of business. They want to make profit. But I think what is more important is to look at this budget as one which is trying to build a block towards achieving the agenda of industrialization in Tanzania, and is therefore based on the 5-year development plan. And looking at the budget, when the government says that it will allocate a lot of money to education, money to infrastructure, water, energy, those are the very things which have been constraining doing business in Tanzania. And when you see now the government is trying to do that, then I think you should be comfortable by looking at a longer view. And we have to look at this budget, first of all, knowing that this budget has an aim of industrialization. That being the case, is to ask whether this budget is on the right track. And the right track means then it will lay a solid foundation for achieving that objective of industrialization. Let me use the metaphor of someone wanting to go to Dodoma. The first thing you have to do is to board the right bus going to Dodoma. But sitting in a bus going to Dodoma, you are not yet in Dodoma. You have to start the traveling Kibaha, Morogoro, until you reach Dodoma. So
there's challenges in between.
There's challenges, definitely. And those challenges, and what will come in between are the years, the subsequent years, which will reach us there. Tanzanians, sometimes we are lazy in thinking. When you say you want to industrialize, you think this very budget will be the budget for industrialization. No, the road has started, and I think we are on the right track. Definitely, I have problems with the paradigm change. I don't see a clear paradigm change, meaning then, therefore, if you are using the same development paradigm, which killed industries, to revamp industries, to industrialize, that won't work. Definitely, the paradigm change is not very explicit in the budget, nor in the plan, 5-year development plan. But implicitly, we are seeing paradigm change. We are talking about protection of local industries, which is good for our local investors. We are talking about harmonization of East African taxes and so on and so forth. So there is a change in paradigm, but that paradigm seems not to be explicitly stated in the budget as well as in the plan.
Professor, people argue, those in the past, like probably you and I, of my age, that this country had, I wouldn't say a lot, had many industries here, including those which were manufactured in the basic raw material, you know, the basic consumer items. Then they went under. The godowns were bought by so-called investors, but they were used as warehouses. Now, how are we going to revive this situation? Is it by having an industrialization policy, or by doing what? Or by involving more the private sector or not?
Let me, first of all, clear some doubt. In the last 30 years, we've been used to say the private sector is the engine of growth. I don't have a problem with that one. What I have problem is when we say the role of government is that of facilitation, law and order, and put in place the requisite policies. That is too narrow. And we left everything to the private sector. I give you 3 examples. It took us 25 years to have a land development bank, a country which depends on agriculture, having now a bank after 25 years. We've used the private sector 20 years to solve the problem of energy. We were unable to do that. And thirdly, we had to wait 20 years to have an industrial, not even industrial, Tanzania Investment Bank with some windows for industry. To me now, I believe if you want to industrialize, the role of the government has to be enhanced. What they nowadays call development state, in the sense that the government is the role of government to ensure that we have power. And for security reasons, that's the government role. All over the world, go to the UK, go to America. These are the grandfathers of capitalism.
Go to China? Would you want to?
Yeah, that's the model we're going to adopt. That's the model which needs to be adopted, the so-called East Asian model. Yeah. Ethiopia did adopt that and see what is happening in Ethiopia. Botswana also did adopt that model. They discarded the narrow view of neoliberalism of saying, yes, the state's role is that of facilitation only. That is unacceptable if you want to industrialize.
Before you want to come in here, I was going to ask you
on the same role of the government.
Yes.
I don't disagree with what the professor is saying, but then it has to be a limited role in the sense that the government needs to come in as a partner, not necessarily government actually investing in full. And this is why you have things we call PPP, public-private partnership. And in this budget, it's one of the priority areas that the government wishes to grow and develop. And I mean, explain that to Professor. I'll give him an example. If the government collects tax of a certain trillion, let's say 17 trillion, and takes 1 trillion out of that to do a power station, instead of doing proper services of education, health to the people. And then once you do the power station, it belongs to the government. The government again has to do running of the power station, employment of the people, maintenance and everything. That's another taxpayer's money going into a sunk cost. Versus government saying, I have a plot of land here, I have 200 billion, and you, a private person, come and invest the remaining amount. You take the employment cost as a private person, so you actually create employment. You pay taxes as a private person, so the government actually gets revenue out of its own investment, okay? And at the same time, the power is guaranteed. So really, as much as you say the government should take a role, I don't agree with taking overall role. This is where you say the private sector is the engine of development, you give it the mandate to actually push forward. But then this is where you come to what Mr. Kamote was saying, that once you have such an investment plan where you involve the private sector, then the private sector needs certainty. Over time, I'm investing, using the same example, I'm investing 800 billion and, under this tax regime. So next year, you go and change it and make it higher. Another year, you change it again. So really, that's what we say as a private sector, that It's not proper, because if you do that, over time, investors will no longer continue to trust the government that they can actually facilitate or provide the best business environment, which is also another priority area that the government said this year, that they're going to improve the business environment. Okay, so in reality, this is where you have some concerns in the budget. I mean, the government say we want to promote PPP, at the same time taking a lot of allocation of the money, saying we are going to put it in infrastructure. So that's a sunk cost. Where is the PPP?
Joseph,
Yeah.
to follow up on your argument, would you say, for example, this is a vivid example. The government has put aside some billions of money to buy planes.
Exactly.
For the for Air Tanzania.
Yeah.
Is this a bad investment?
Yeah, I mean,
Or this should be done by a private sector?
in my view, yes, it should be done by a private sector on a PPP basis. That is, the government has a stake, and the government actually sits in the board. The government is involved in making the decisions, but it's a business venture run by people who have actually proved themselves to be business people. And the government actually reaps out of that, because if it makes money, they get dividends, and if it makes money more, they get taxes and everything. So really, that's the advocacy. And again, for those now who have not actually come into the PPP with the government, those who actually operate privately per se, and we're invited here maybe as investors and everything, there's a lack of consultation process. When you want to actually change the regime, and specifically the tax regime, this is where we see a problem. Because, I mean, just our neighbors, Uganda, 2 years ago, they enacted a law on how to make a finance bill. And the finance bill is actually made in March. Okay?
We were making ours just
I mean, we only have maximum of 10 days to actually deliberate it, if you ask me. And some of these changes that you make in tax, they involve customer notification, they involve system changes, and you're actually expected to make all those within 10 days and make them effective 1st of July. Yeah, so our friends, they have this process starting from January, and it culminates in March, okay? And then everything is passed. You have your new Finance Act. It's implemented from 1st of July. So in the budget day, they just actually discuss appropriation. Once we collect, how much are we going to spend at each sector? And then from 1st of July, you do implementation. So we are lacking that consultation process, and Mr. Kamote can understand that. We go through Task Force for Tax Reform, which actually comes with proposals that we are not sure that they're taken into implementation. The minister reads a budget, people rush to Dodoma, they go and discuss with the Parliamentary Committee on Budget. Nothing really is actually taken aboard. And then things are confirmed as they are, with a lot of surprises. And then the private sector actually gets shocked. But
Professor, I see you're nodding. You want to come in?
No, I wanted to go back to where I started,
Yes.
about the role of the public sector and the private sector. I agree from the beginning that really, yes, the private sector is the engine of growth, but the state sector is the wheels of growth, in the sense that you can have a turbo brand new engine, but without wheels, it won't move. We're talking about the PPPs as if it's something which is very new. It's not. We've been practicing PPP for a number of years.
In this country?
In this, for example, very simple. Cemeteries are owned by municipalities. There's a public institution, but the funeral process is being conducted by private people. This is a very early PPP. And when you look at the PPPs in Tanzania, Air Tanzania, the railways, the stories behind that one, those were PPPs. But there was inadequate preparedness on the part of the government, in the sense that they became shopping deals between the government as well as the private sector. So the other challenge which must be faced by the private sector is to avoid what I call shopping deals, which tend to suck money, people's money from government. And of course, the challenge is for the government also to do adequate preparedness before they go into such deals. I give you a good example. I was doing the PPPs outsourcing of patients' food in regional hospitals. I won't mention that regional hospital. Government, before the PPP undertaken, it was giving 600 to 800 million shillings per month to that hospital to feed the patients. But when they got into PP, the very government was giving 16 million. No, that was 680,000. Then it jumped to 16 million. I was shocked because the government now, when they want to negotiate with the private sector, they didn't have their own feasibility study. So yes, PPs are good, but we need adequate preparedness on the part of the government. And lastly, on the question of the other role, yes, we're talking about Air Tanzania. Tell me, if I want to go to Mtwara tomorrow, if I want to go to Kigoma tomorrow, if I want to go to Kilimanjaro, Mwanza, I will fail to go because there is no public airline? Definitely not. There are already private sector airlines doing very well. So instead of the government going full-fledged to revamp the Air Tanzania, they should buy shares in those areas. Look over even Swiss Air, which was government-owned, collapsed.
Okay.
And you know, Swiss Air was one of the biggest airlines. Even in America, it happened the same thing. Why do we want to venture in such a volatile business when we have gurus of business who can do that?
But the national airline is as equally important. It carries the flag and represents Tanzania. Don't you think so?
Yeah, to me, in that area, actually, I have very different opinion of the government purchasing aircraft. I think this is a very sensitive issue. I don't know whether a good feasibility study has been done to inform the government on the reality of establishing a national airline. It's very difficult. Now, and you're starting with 2 airplanes, 3. I don't think that is a good decision, because looking at the market, I think they could have started with the market. That then they can now make a decision of purchasing aircraft. To me, I feel like it was just a national, to have a national, regardless whether it's doing business or it doesn't. So to me, I think the profit motive should have been very, very important decision making, rather than having a national airline for what?
But Kanote, CTI is involved in dialogue with the government when preparing the budget. Did the private sector through CTI make these points clear?
No, some of we are a very good partner in the preparation of the budget.
Yes.
But as Lima said, there are so many surprises this year. Things which we didn't discuss at the task force level, even at the think tank level,
yes,
were announced in Dodoma, and they came as shock. Okay, and you have said it very well that we are now in the EAC integration process, yes, and we are applying the common external tariff, yes, for most of our products. But this year, Tanzania, for instance, decided to increase import duty on industrial sugar. Actually, all countries decided to increase import duty on industrial sugar from 10 to 15%. But all other countries except Tanzania did implement it. Now you see, we are making ourselves a market for products from Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi, because they are coming to Tanzania duty-free where they haven't paid any duty on industrial sugar. Again, this came as a shock also, and of course, their politics. You know, when you mix politics and economics and business, sometimes you miss the path. So this year also there has been a shock of increasing import duty on crude palm oil from 0 to 10% for Tanzania, and other countries still importing crude palm oil at 0. That means we encourage importation, actually smuggling, from other EAC partner states where import duty is very low to Tanzania. And by doing that, we were asking ourselves, are we encouraging industrialization in Tanzania?
But at the same time, the government is quoted by in many quarters, but particularly from the business side, that this budget is protectionist.
Well,
which means it's protecting local industry, local business.
Well, we don't want to use the word protecting, yes, because actually protecting sometimes is not a good word, but for supporting. Because if you create that word of protecting, you make these managers, owners of industries becoming a little bit lazy. They don't think outside the box because they know they are being protected, just like the sugar industry is being protected. They know they don't have the capacity. Their capacity is only to produce 3,000 metric tons per year. The demand is over 5,000. They are being protected by having an import duty of 100%, and you don't import without getting a permission from Tanzania Sugar Board. See, the industry is not expanding. So yes, we need protection, but you have to do it in a very, very clever way so that you don't discourage incentive for these people to think hard, to get outside the box. So I think we need to combine both. But sincerely, for industrialization, with this budget, of course, as one of our panelists said, it needs a time between 5 to 10 years to see actual industrialization taking place. So I would like to maybe caution those people who think that industrialization will come tomorrow. They should not think about that. It takes quite a long time before you establish industries in any country, not in Tanzania. But there was a very good point here of how we industrialize. But the most important thing is to take, some people don't want history. But for me, I want history. I have to see why we had a very strong industrial sector in Tanzania during the Ujamaa kind of socialism. It was very strong. Most of the industries today which we have were constructed during that time. Sure. But most of them died. We have to ask ourselves why they died. And if we know why they died, then our programs, our plan, we address the areas which led to the death of these. Some of them are trade policies. The trade policies need to be amended so that to encourage, to have trade policy which is not protectionist but which is supporting industries. For instance, somebody who wants to invest in a serious industry, in a high-tech industry like electronics and electricity, and comes to the market of Dar es Salaam and find all those substandard goods, all those counterfeit goods, they won't invest in Tanzania. So there's a need for addressing these issues such as counterfeit. They are discouraging investors. Substandard, they are discouraging investors. So all these are the issues which need to be addressed, and the mindset. I'm saying this, I'm sorry, but I think there's some negative mindset of public sector on the private sector.
But the Fair Competition Commission is banning all these fake goods every other day. That doesn't help?
Yeah, it helps. It has set a tone that we are going to the direct direction, but the war is huge. We have done a recent study where we have identified about 30% or 40 counterfeit or substandard.
You mean goods?
Yes, goods.
Coming into
Tanzania through porous borders.
Yes.
So I think the war, and I have been challenging my colleague in the Fair Competition Commission and TBS and TFDA that I think they should go a mile ahead. When they come to my shop and find a counterfeit product, they should not end by destroying. They should follow the value chain until they capture the real person who have imported the counterfeit.
Who supplied this?
Who supplied that. But they don't do that. They just come and they confiscate and destroy this, leaving the big sharks out there.
Which,
so I think
which means the next time he's going to import again.
It's a very profitable business.
Yeah.
Which is also a matter of coordination.
Yes.
If there is poor coordination amongst the institutional frameworks for fighting counterfeit commodities, we have TRI. TRI seems to be interested in collecting the customs duty. The police, if they themselves are consuming the same counterfeit commodities, they cannot apprehend anybody. It remains then only the TBS perhaps and the FCC who may be interested. So there is need to strengthen that coordination. You mentioned also the issue of trade policy conflicting with the industrialization policy. You have to ensure that this conflict does not exist. It doesn't make sense, for example, if you have already you are producing matches within your country and you let substandard matches come here. I've been talking about the importation of toothpick You need really dollars in order to toothpick when you have eaten your nyamambuzi. It's strange. So these are the things that
the famous MP Kangi Lugora raised this.
I remember I heard about it. Yes.
Surely we are importing even toothpicks.
But we've been doing that for the last 15 years. Where was he?
And where do we import them from? Where do we import them from? Maybe the same source.
From the same source.
Okay.
From the source.
What is in there in the budget for the industry, for business and industry? Or what is it that
we are very glad? We are very glad. There are so many measures which I think will help industries to expand. One, for instance, I have said this when we started, the decision by the government to increase import duty on cement from 25 to 35, that is very good. It's going to discourage importation of cement from various countries, and that means we expand the local production of cement, and that is a very good measure. But again, also increase import duty on iron and steel construction material, because we have plenty of them in the country. That is a very good measure by the government. But of course, there are small issues like a reduction of skills development levy from 5% to 4.45. It's small, but it's a gesture that the government is taking care of the government. But again, also there's this reduction of pay as you earn. It's also a motivation. One person can say, "Oh, it's small," but I think it's a motivation, and actually is a process. I understand the government will reduce it slowly, and until we have a very comfortable and sensible size of skills development. To our side, it's 2%, because that's what is going to VETA, and for pay as you earn, I think there's a best number which we don't have yet. But that is the positive side of the budget, and we believe that's the right direction. It's small, but small makes small plus small, you get big. So I think in the next 5 years, we may end up being big in terms of incentive and measures which are geared towards industrialization in Tanzania.
So, Joe, yes, those who say this budget is unfriendly to investors or even to business and industry are being unfair?
To an extent, they're not being unfair. And when you speak of investors, you are actually speaking of people who actually bring their money here to invest and for the long term, and expect the situation or the conditions that have been there to be stable over time. And if they're going to change, then with a prior notice or with discussion. So really, areas that are of concern to investors are things like where the government maybe is forcing them to introduce local shareholding into their business. And a good example is for telcos, where in this year's budget, the government has actually passed a law to force them to list 25% of their shares to the Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange. No, in the telecommunication. Telecommunication. So it's an issue that has been discussed for quite a long time. And in his speech, when the minister was actually putting this across, he says it's for the purpose of having an inclusive economy. That is, every Tanzanian should actually participate in the economy. But then, is it because telecommunication became successful? Is it because telecommunication became popular? What does it say?
Oh, because there's money there.
Yes, and what does it say if I come tomorrow and invest in agriculture and it grows and becomes big? Does it mean I'll also have to offload my stake to the public? I speak of that in any other industry. So actually, that makes it very uncertain in relation to the investors. So and then you're also looking at, for example, the extractive sector. It's a very sensitive sector. Every time you talk of minerals and every time you talk of oil and gas, all Tanzanians actually stand up and open their eyes to listen. But then, different from the mine sector, the oil and gas sector, I should say the government did a quite good job in entering into the production sharing agreements, of which the production sharing agreements give a lot of shares of the production back to the government through TPDC. So the government is actually going to get on a full-fledged production up to 70% actually of the gas that is being produced. So the investor actually remains with around 30 to 35%, of which he has to remove his costs and make a profit.
And that is acceptable to investors.
And that is acceptable to the investors, given the values. But then suddenly this year, they have actually increased the tax on profit from 30% to 35%. So without considering the tech that the government is actually already taking. So I'd say it could be a good move, but done at a wrong time, in the sense that these people are still investing now. Okay, they have not yet started producing, and if you scare them with the 35% corporate tax, and I mean, these things are a question of numbers, and a lot of people, mathematicians, will tell you numbers never lie. So they'll just factor in what their cost is and what their profit is going to be and how much they're going to fork out to the government. And
in terms of tax.
In terms of tax, and they'll stop investing. So the dream that we have in the next 10 years is actually a bit threatened. And I'll say some of the things, they are good moves, but when do you actually implement them? And let me just finish on this. That is, it's another thing that I wanted just to say in relation to this budget, and this is the proposal by the minister to actually tax the gratuity of the MPs
and government officials.
Yeah, and government officials,
including right to the level of the president.
I mean, this is why I'm saying some of these proposals are good. Okay, and as I said, even for the oil and gas sector, it's good. But when do you actually bring them in? You bring them in when they have an effect into the government coffers. So you actually, this budget has been diverted in a way. Instead of MPs discussing what we consider to be the important changes into the tax law, the important changes into policy, they have spent a lot of time discussing their gratuity. But this gratuity,
that impacts them directly.
It is taxed. It is taxed 5 years later.
Yes.
Actually, you're talking of something that, if anything, it is going to bring revenue in 2020. Okay, not now, because the gratuity is actually paid in 2020 when they finish. And you're talking of something that they still have 4 years to amend if they want. Okay, so which is the same thing I'm saying, like for oil and gas, and if the professor is going to comment on that, is it might be a good change, but brought at the wrong time, because you need to wait until people have invested and things are rolling, and then you impose. But when people are trying to invest and then you impose, then you're actually scaring people off.
Professor, you said you didn't agree. I heard you say you don't agree with Joseph.
I think I don't disagree. I don't agree with him on that. What you try to tell us is that we should take as if the private sector investors are doing a favor to us, in the sense that you want to give them incentive, a lot of incentives, in order to lure them in, and at the same time, because of the high incentives given to them, they take the good chunk of what they brought in out. Why am I saying so? Look at the mineral sector. We've been too overgenerous with the exemptions. And then at the end of the day, we've been gaining only 5% royalties. But the private sector should know, the investors should know that the resources are public resources. They are our resources. And I've been always saying, there is only one Zanzibar in the world. There is only one Kilimanjaro in the world. And some of these people, they will come. What you need to do is to ensure that you have the right environment for them to come. And paying tax is one of the obligations. When the investors come here, the Tigos, the Vodas, they know they're going to get profit, they're going to make profit. If you end up being cheated and give them exemptions, and you think, by thinking that you are giving them a favor, you are robbing this country, you won't develop. But that's why I'm going to finish with that.
Just that on that point. I mean, if we don't feel that they are doing us a favor, is this really fair? Because they don't have to come to Tanzania. There's so many other places where they can go. Why particularly Tanzania?
This has been always the case. There was a time we hurried a few things, say, yo, if you don't do that, they will go to Mozambique. So you end up making shobe deals, which we end up losing as a nation because of that worry. Okay, let them go. If I have not made my house properly, if I'm ill prepared, it's better I let them go. Then when I am well prepared, then they'll come. At the same time, when you give upfront incentives to investors, you are not encouraging long-term investors. You are encouraging short-term speculative investors. And we've been seeing that one. For example, with exemptions, after every 5 years, hotels in the slum, I don't want to mention them, you know them, they keep on changing names. Because after 5 years, the exemption is out. I will definitely I'll give exemptions for someone already who has been in situ in Tanzania for 10 years. Because I say, thank you very much, you've been in Tanzania for 10 years, you've been creating employment, then definitely I'm going to give incentives. And related to that one, if you want your growth to be inclusive, your people benefiting from that growth, then joint ventures of any kind are the best modalities. Therefore, the question of that they have to register with our DSE is a good thing.
That's some stock exchange.
Yes, joint stock is a good thing. Likewise, in future, we should avoid giving 100% ownership to foreign investment. We should go for...
How about local investors?
Yes, for foreign local investors. This is their
because they're also involved, isn't it?
Yes, they're also involved. But the question, the principle should be joint ventures. Botswana is a good thing. And remember, people have been going to Botswana for study tours before they make the regulations for our mineral industries, only to find, actually, these people, they didn't go to Botswana to learn. They went there for shopping and partying. And came with 100% ownership.
Okay, Professor. Okay. I know
I just wanted
you want to come in very briefly.
Yeah,
Time seems to be running
just
out.
Briefly, because I work in taxes every day. And there was a time when this country was full of incentives. And Professor, for your information, I want to tell you that that's no longer the case. TIC has been just reduced into encouraging investors to come here and have really minimum tax exemption, and this is only maybe on importation of goods, and only some. So this country has actually moved itself from incentives. In the past 5 years, that's what we have been reducing. Yes, actually, it has just remained to actually 1% of the total GDP. So we are no longer in this country talking of exemptions. Even for the oil and gas sector, we are no longer talking of exemptions. And actually, that's what I said, in the production sharing agreements, it's a joint venture, it's a good deal. The investor comes and invests his money, okay? The government gives him, there's a resource there, go exploit, you invest his money in billions of dollars, finds the resource, and then you say, when you start producing, the government is gonna take 70% of that. Full stop, that's how it is currently. And what we are saying is, fine, you enter into that agreement from the beginning, this person came in, invested, and still said, even though you're saying that, with the 30% that I'm gonna have, I'll still be happy with my investment money. But then you change the goalposts in the middle of the game and say, no, I'm going to take 35% of your profit. Okay, so that's what the investors are saying. Okay, wait a bit. This is what we discussed and agreed.
So we don't need to change the goalposts.
We don't need to change the goalposts in the middle of the game. So what we are saying is, yes, there are resources. Yes, congratulate the government in the way they've entered into this agreement. And yes, in order to actually have more of them coming into this term, with these terms, let's actually be certain. Okay? Why do we change the goalpost in the middle of the game? Okay. So that's really my
okay. We have a very few minutes to wind up. The last question, which doesn't mean, of course, this is the least important, but it's equally important. And Kamote, you might want to come in here. Both the three of you. Do you think the budget has encouraged the private sector to flourish? And do you think there is more room for private sector participation in the economy of this country?
Yeah, I may start there. that some of us who have been in the, happened to work here also in the government for 20 plus years and in the private sector. I think by words, the budget has got some very positive, as I said, sides on the encouraging the private sector to flourish. But I think on the ground, we still don't see that. The way we are being included in various stages in budget setting, it seems, well, I can't say that we are going there just to rubber stamp, but it seems our views, in the past, our views were heard. Not only heard, but also were being implemented. But we have seen in this budget, most of the proposals which came from the private sector, they were not being adopted and considered. And those which came from the government were considered. Of course, I know the reasons is of this high jump increase of budget by 35%, which in my views, I started this, to me, is a high jump, and given the narrow tax base, it may be very difficult to attain, but let's wait and see. So I think we still have, there's this kind of negative mindset between the government, the officials, and the private sector. And that's why we are seeing that even our involvement is not as serious as we used to see. So I think we need to have a partnership, friendship. Actually, a partnership, we may be partner, but not friends. What we are saying here, for the government to actually attain most of their objectives, especially in the industrial sector, apart from being a partner, it should be a friend. Whenever I have a problem in my industry, I need to negotiate it with the government officials. But look what is happening. A big government officials goes to an industry and finds somebody that has not put a headgear, and this person immediately finds the industry to pay 20 million. Instead of asking for a venue to discuss why these people are not putting headgears, you are going right away penalizing them. 20 million. Of course, for instance, there was a change, I think it was on the income tax or whatever. They are saying objection. If you have objection on your returns to TRI, yes. In the past you are paying on 30% of the amount which you are objecting. But now you are paying 100%. You pay everything, so there's no incentive for the government to pursue that one. And we know the government does not refund people on time. Yes. So I think there are some issues which we need
Time has jumped. From 10 minutes, we are now left with only 4 minutes. Oh, yes. Because I was going to say, I'll give you a few minutes. I was going to say, or to ask you, therefore, the environment to do business in Tanzania is not yet that conducive. Very quickly.
It's not yet very conducive comparing to other countries, because here, for instance, if you want to establish a business, there are so many steps you need to follow. Our colleague in Rwanda, maybe 3 days you register your business, but here you have to go and see OSHA, you have to TFDA, you have to move various stages before you are given that permit.
A few minutes?
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on one thing, I will say the budget overall, it's a balance with some positives and some negatives or concern to the private sector. And just to mention some few positives, he has actually mentioned skills and development reduction is a reduction in cost, greater protection of the local manufacturers. Even the excise duties that have increased have just been modest to the inflation, 5%. But then there's also something like introduction of VAT on the financial service sector, which is actually making banks and telecommunication companies not very competitive. People shy away from using the financial sector and reduces financial inclusion. But lastly, just to respond to Kamote, the 100% thing has been reversed in the bill. So it's now still
it's a positive thing.
It's a positive thing. It's still 30%, but it has just been made mandatory.
All right, Professor. Last word, a few seconds.
Yeah, the budget. I see it a watershed is a sandwich of continuity, and departures.
Yes.
Continuities, syntax on alcohol, cigarette remains still a source of revenue. There is need to broaden the base.
Yes.
Departures, we are now putting a lot of money than before on development expenditure. That's very good news. Departures, again, we're talking about protecting our industries. But while protecting, we need a stick and a carrot. The carrot is the protection, but the stick, give them time frame when you do away with the protection so that it swings in a frying pan. If it burns, it's well and good. But without that, protection will become a disincentive.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you very much, my panelists, Kamote, Limo, Professor Moshi, for your very strong and very useful insight into the budget vis-a-vis the private sector or the business and industry. I'm sure the points that we have raised here will be taken up by the powers that be, and we move forward because this country is ours and ours alone. The business sector is making a contribution, the public sector is making a contribution. So I thank you very much for your contribution. Viewers, you heard the views of my panelists here. The 2016-2017, which is about shillings 25.5 trillion budget, as presented to the Parliament with the theme Industrial Growth and Job Creation, aims at encouraging growth through industrialization. And you've heard from my panelists here, we need to start somewhere. It's not a matter of tomorrow or the day after. Irrigation, that's one of those areas. Integration of human resources and development. Again, a reduction of donor dependency, which I suppose we have seen in this budget, and establishment of business environment. You've heard from Kamote that is still not that conducive. However, some experts have described the budget as unfriendly to business, industry, and investors, and we've heard Limo explain that further. But to me, I ask the question, is this true? Well, if you think it's true from what Limo has said, well, that's your public opinion. Let us hope that the government will continue to create an efficient, conducive environment for doing business, which will in turn attract more investments and allow local industries to perform better, thus hopefully create a positive and effective collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. This is all I think we have for you today. Until next Sunday at 21 hours and at the same time, and on Thursday at 15 hours for the repeat program. On behalf of my panel, Professor Moshi, Joseph Limo, Hussein Kamote, and my TBC Television Center crew, thank you viewers and goodbye.